Hexaria is home to a duo of cards which have drastically changed how players have approached deck building for the past few years. Two cards that put the player at a noticeable disadvantage if neither of them are brought in a deck due to their unique utility. Two cards which have made many appearances in past videos on this channel, and for a good reason. Today's topic of discussion is none other than Mask of Uncertainty and Lunatic's Repose, Hexaria's hand reroll cards, or Mulligans. As you typically get one of the cards early on in player progression and the other in endgame, I see this video as being relevant to all players of Hexaria. We're going over what makes Mulligans so good in Hexaria, the stats of the two cards of discussion, their opportunity costs over each other, and how to obtain them. Let's get into the video. That's what the mask is! Mask of Uncertainty has had by far the biggest glow up of any card in Hexaria, going from an unusable draw 2, discard 2 mess to more or less an auto include before Lunatic's was added in 50 card decks. I really cannot emphasize how abysmal old Mask of Uncertainty was to use before its rework.
What are these curious circles? They have little faces on them, how quaint. Poor people eat these. Disgusting! Jeeves, take it away!
Back to its current state, it's a common card which costs 0 bits and is also quick play, meaning using Mask of Uncertainty won't take up your whole turn. On use, it reshuffles your entire hand at the time back into your deck, and then draws cards equal to the amount of cards reshuffled minus 2. Previously, it was just -1, but then it got nerfed out of nowhere with no explanation. The biggest reason to use Mask of Uncertainty has to be its cost of 0 bits. You pay nothing up front, with the only downside being the possibility of ending up with a hand that's worse than what you had before using it. With net -2 for its return, this scenario can happen quite a bit. However, net -2 does free up a lot of your hand, so it's a give and take situation. I thought I'd also mention that Mask of Uncertainty being 0 cost means you can Demon Lore the card for free, a great way to quickly hit the reset button on a bad hand. Overall, it's a great Mulligan card with a fair share of pros and cons. Please let Ignis cook more. In an era where complex cards are being added left and right, it was nice to see the next Mulligan in players' hands stay relatively simple in its design. Lunatic's Repose is a rare card that costs 1 bit and is also a quick play, meaning using Lunatic's Repose won't take up your whole turn. On use, you'll have your whole hand reshuffled back into your deck, except this time, you'll draw cards equal to the amount of cards reshuffled, a net neutral reroll. Additionally, you'll get healed equal to the amount of cards drawn times the cost of the highest bit cost card drawn. With extremely expensive decks, this could get pretty ridiculous at times. Then again, you have to run an absurd amount of high cost cards to begin with. Lastly, if you're under 20% of your max health, the card's effects are reused. In a previous video, I went over how static discharge's conditional is more of a bonus than a requirement to make the card useful, and I think that Lunatic's Repose did a good job of accomplishing this too, so bonus points for that. While you do need to bring some cards which cost multiple bits to actually get a chip heal off of Lunatic's Repose, it's something you're probably already doing when making a casual deck, so that's really a non-issue. Another elite mulligan that players can utilize in deck building very well. If you're at this point in the video, I just want to say thanks for watching. If you like what you're seeing, feel free to leave a like on the video so more people can see it. If you want to know when more content drops, feel free to subscribe as well. We're almost at 200 subscribers, and it would mean a lot if we could hit that milestone. Although, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if it happened while I'm still making this video. If you think you don't need mulligans in a 50 card deck, you should probably reconsider. Opening hands are crucial since getting a good one has you at a huge advantage. A scenario I see myself in a lot is trying to top deck a Conjure or Demon Lore at the start of the fight. So I can either Conjure all of my Everfrost chunks and use them, or Demon Lore Conjure so I can do the former. This opening allows me to get some good bit economy prepared for later in the fight, while partially cleaning up my hand. However, this opening doesn't just fall out of the sky. As I usually bring 2 Conjures and a full set of Demon Lores in decks, I also use Everfrost chunk in, and this is a 50 card deck we're talking about. It's about a 1 in 3 chance I get to pull this off right at the start of the fight. However, having mulligans in the deck too is obviously going to up my chances of pulling a Conjure or Mask of Uncertainty, since it means I get to cycle my deck a little bit more than usual if I use one. Well, if I pull one in my starting hand, that is. It's not a perfect solution, but it ups my odds ever so slightly higher. A good reason to run mulligans. Another mechanic of Hexaria that makes mulligans as good as they are is none other than the fixed hand limit of 7. The hand limit can either be generous or restricting based on what playstyle your deck is going for, but most of the time it's going to be restricting because of how a lot of highly used cards are expensive ones too. Being at or going over the hand limit means you won't have access to passive draws at the start of your turn, something which can make pulling a specific card more difficult than it has to be. You'll either have to play cards until you have less than 7 cards, or self-discard until you have less than 7 cards. Unsurprisingly, sometimes you can't afford to do either of these actions. Mulligans let you lower your hand limit without forcing you to play a card you really don't need to play at the time, or self-discarding. They can also, just not get you into situations where you have a lot of cards you don't want at the time in your hand in the first place. Well, we went over the stats, and then why the stats are good, but which of the, as of the making of this video, 2 Mulligan cards should I bring? Again, this delves a little bit into the concept of opportunity cost, but not as much as the big 3 AoE card video. The 2 Mulligans have their own pros and cons over one another that I see as the deciding factors for which one you should bring. Uncertainty does a better job at providing the player with a cheap Mulligan option and is the lower rarity. However, its net -2 return has the potential to leave you off worse than before you use the card. It also, obviously, doesn't heal you on use. Lunatic's instead focuses on providing the player with a higher quality of return and will additionally drop a, most of the time small, heal after its use. However, its rarity is rare instead. Don't worry, you can still conjure and think about it, and it costs more. 1 bit might not sound much in the grand scheme of things, but I'd like to remind you that save for the card's chip heal, you're not progressing the fight in any way by spending a bit on that mulligan. Because of these mostly equal pros and cons, it can be hard to figure out which one to use in a specific deck. So, I made an extremely simplified flowchart for how you could approach the mulligans in deck building. First off, is your deck very expensive? Do you have a lot of high cost cards present in it? If your deck is very expensive, then is your deck's bit economy good enough to match it? If yes, then you'll probably have some bits to spare using a Lunatic's Repose and should run that. If no, then you'll want Mask of Uncertainty since you might not always be able to afford using Lunatic's Repose. Now, if your deck isn't that expensive, then things are going to look a little different. As you're going to be playing cards more often, now the question is going to be if you're bringing enough card draws to sift through your deck efficiently. If you feel like you have enough card draws to rebound after the -2 return of Mask of Uncertainty, then use that. If you don't think you have enough card draws for Mask of Uncertainty, then use Lunatic's Repose for its larger return. This isn't the end-all be-all for choosing a mulligan for your deck, as there's some more minute things that could be a deciding factor, such as having a lack of heal cards, but it covers enough deck building issues to the point where I think it can be helpful for newer players who have both options. Although, I think we've forgotten a card here we still unfortunately need to talk about. It exists. I get what it was trying to do as a team mulligan, but in a scenario where your allies don't really have a complete say on receiving the mulligan, it can potentially cause more harm than help. When used, all enemies adjacent to the caster will have their hand reshuffled and then draw anywhere between 0 to 9 cards. The caster and all allies adjacent to the caster will instead have their hand reshuffled and draw anywhere between 4 to 9 cards. Add the fact that this card costs a whopping 3 bits, isn't quick play, and you can't think about it, and this card really has a lot of problems going for it. When you spend 3 bits on this card, you're not progressing the fight in any way through damage, buffing, or healing. Lunatic's Repose gets off the hook for spending a bit because you get a chip heal along with a better return compared to Mask of Uncertainty. Winds of Fortune doesn't get this treatment. Enemy reshuffles aren't the best thing to run in PvE due to how enemies have infinite decks, and as we've established before, team reshuffles have the ability to harm your teammates more than help. And again, this is for 3 bits. I feel like this card is more of an Electro Tile rune case, where it's an NPC card which just so happened to be fair enough for players to have it, not the other way around. Although, the devs didn't say anything about this, so again, interpretation's up in the air. However, if there was the option to rebalance Winds of Fortune in some way, I'd probably make it quick play so you at the very least aren't spending a whole turn on it. As I said earlier in the video, these cards are polar opposites of where they can be obtained in player progression, so the methods on how you'll acquire Mask of Uncertainty and Lunatic's Repose will be entirely different. Mask of Uncertainty has the same obtainability method as the previously covered Masquerade, appearing in Genesis card packs and their respective mini card packs. You can get the former from Sirius and the latter from Sentinel Hill quests. It's a common pull, so you shouldn't have that much trouble getting a full set of 4. As for Lunatic's Repose, it actually has 2 methods of obtaining it. This card is a 3% drop from Dark Mages, which can be fought in the Dark Islands raid. If fighting Dark Mages isn't your thing, Lunatic's Repose can also be obtained through Gilbert for 4 Pilfered Souls per copy. You can get Pilfered Souls from anything on this giant list. Personally, I'd just exchange Pilfered Souls for the card, since by the time you're in endgame, you should have a decent amount of souls lying around in your inventory. Finally, Winds of Fortune can be obtained as a 3% drop from Elite Aeromancers. It's as simple as that. To wrap it up, Mulligans aren't just about fixing bad hands, they shape how consistent your entire deck feels. Mask of Uncertainty rewards cheap and flexible decks, while Lunatic's Repose shines in more expensive ones. Neither card is strictly better than the other, probably, but both are essential tools if you want to push your deck past the pray for top decks phase and actually have some control over your hand. If you're serious about deck building in Hexaria, Mulligans are where you start. See ya.